order. Department 61 is again in session.
All right, Mr. Chapin, you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir. Okay. So we left off with Mr. Barrett and Mr. Wicker's conversation and the two accounts, Wicker's account and Barrett's account. So Wicker took his version of the conversation to Mr. Sturck, his boss, and Mr. Sturck at that point instructed him to conduct an investigation into Coach Burns. Now, Wicker had never run an investigation before. He'd previously been a facilities manager at another school of Washington State up in the Northwest. He didn't follow standard procedures of the university policy in conducting investigations, and he didn't involve human resources folks as he'd been instructed to do by Ms. Rouse. Essentially, the things he didn't do was he didn't interview Coach Burns. He did this behind her back. The standard practice is that you interview everyone involved. Mr. Wicker didn't do that. He selected certain people who he anticipated might have negative things to say about Coach Burns. He took selected notes when we were writing down negative things. He didn't produce notes for several of the people he interviewed, even though they recalled him writing things as he was talking to them. And one of the groups of people interviewed was the outgoing seniors on the women's basketball team. He stated in his report that they asked to be interviewed to bring negative things forward about the women's basketball program. Now, the captain of the team is going to dispute that. She's going to say no. She had played at Duke, which was a really phenomenal program. And every year, at the end of the season, they would have a end-of-season review and exit interview. And that's what she thought they were going to have. She had talked to Mr. Sturck about it, but she wasn't wanting to go in and trash Coach Burns. And the seniors would say that, not all of them, but we haven't talked to all of them, but some will say that what he wrote down about what they said was a misrepresentation, where he took things out of context. He only told half the story. He only told half the story. Another individual that he interviewed was Michael Bynum. Michael Bynum, B-Y-N-U-M, was the videographer. He's the guy that would a video of the practices and the games. Mr. Bynum was a young man. This was an entry-level position for him in the women's basketball program. Entry-level position. He graduated from college. He didn't have a job. He wanted to go into athletic administration. And so he roomed with a fellow who had been the video coordinator. And so he wanted to give it a try, and Coach Burns gave that to him, that opportunity. Now, Mr. Bynum, unbeknownst to Coach Burns, had taken umbrage at some things that in interactions with him. Coach Burns was demanding, no question about it. And so Mr. Bynum had some situations where he wasn't performing up to her expectations, and she called him out on it. And he didn't like that. He felt he was disrespected. And so he went to Mr. Wicker, told him about this, and Mr. Wicker had him write up his stuff. One of them was an incident, he had him write up what he had observed. Slide 64 shows his write-up. Now, you can't see all this, but the thing that I want to highlight is the date of it. It's an email dated February 14, 2013. And then he is writing up incidents that where he's got dates on them. and this is the wrong page, unfortunately. And there's another page that may depict this, but in any event, the point that I wanted to make is that he recreated events, and he had the wrong date in his recreation. He wrote in that it happened in 2011 when it happened in 2012. So kind of sloppy, and the point is that Mr. Bynum was not as reliable as Coach Burns wanted him to be. And in the process of her counseling him, he got upset, and he was angry about it, and he reported it to Mr. Wicker. So, Mr. Wicker conducts this investigation, so-called investigation. Now, quite frankly, at one point in time, they answered interrogatories under oath, or questions under oath, saying that they based their decision to fire Coach Burns on their pre-termination investigation. Let me say that again. Pre-termination investigation by John David Wicker. And then later on, they said, well, we didn't really conduct an investigation. She didn't have a right to an investigation, so we're not going to call it an investigation. But under oath, they called it an investigation. And whether she had an right to it or not, we contend that if we're going to fire her based on what they call an investigation, then it's got to be done right. And it's not got to contain misrepresentations. So Mr. Stirk gets Mr. Wicker's investigation report, and he prepares some talking points to take to the president of the university, Dr. Hirschman. Exhibit 41. Let's start up here at the top. He had an introduction, and then he goes down to the second bullet point. And here's what he says. Coach has a long history of treating her staff in the athletic department poorly, a long history of losing her temper, yelling, cursing, and publicly calling out staff in a manner that's embarrassing. That's her reputation, and it's well known here as well as in the women's basketball community. Now, folks, we've looked into this. Cursing was something that very few people ever heard Coach Burns do. She had a rule that if you cursed, you had to do push-ups. And the players will tell you that. A couple of people have said, yeah, she did curse a few times. And the question, what was it? Well, she said, damn. That was a curse word that she used. Now, Bynum reported one time that she used the F word. People who were there, person who was there, disputes that she didn't. So in any event, that there was that one incident where he claimed she did. Long history. We're going to go over her long history involving her performance reviews. They don't support that. Her reputation is well known here as well as in the women's basketball profession nationally. Well, that's just not true. Coach Burns had a national reputation, very highly regarded. Coach Fisher, Coach Steve Fisher, testified in his deposition that women coaches across the country respected her. He's out, he sees women coaches, so he gave us information about her national reputation. She was on national organization boards or had leadership positions in them because she was highly regarded and respected nationally. The next item is that I want to go to is the bullet point where she has failed to improve. We worked with her over the years, counseling her regarding the need to improve her behavior toward other employees. She's consistently failed to sustain the improvement. I'm going to show you in a few minutes 2 performance reviews in the 2 years before she was fired, where they gave her improved marks, improved grades for her interaction with staff. Now, she did have an incident when her team was in the Sweet 16 down in Memphis, Tennessee. Here's what happened. This was the biggest game of her career, the biggest game of the career of these kids, and in many instances in their lives. So they were primed to play, and they had a player whose father wanted to go see his daughter play. He didn't have the money. So the neighbors in the neighborhood took up a collection. They bought him a plane ticket, and that story was in the San Diego Union. Well, when the compliance people at San Diego State got hold of it, bells started going off. They were concerned with whether there was a violation of the NCAA rules, and I don't fault that. What we fault is, what Coach Burns faulted was this. This compliance officer goes to her players. He didn't go to her to talk to her about the problem. He goes to the players and to their parents, some of their parents. And it set off alarm bells. And Coach Burns was fielding calls from parents that were upset. She was up until 2 o'clock in the morning, the night before a big game, trying to deal with this. The players were scared, concerned, because the player involved was a star player on the team, and it was a big mess. And she did read the riot act to this compliance officer named Jay Larson. And after she calmed down, she got back to San Diego. They lost the game. She apologized to him and was sorry for it. She got graded down on her review that year. She accepts that, but she bounced back and she got improved grades the next year. Another item is assistant coaches are always trying to escape her. Assistant coaches are always trying to escape her. Right? The average tenure, right here. Okay. The average tenure of assistant coaches is 2 years, or 2.5 years. Well, the women's basketball assistants at San Diego State were not compensated nearly at the level the men were compensated. That's just a fact. I think that's wrong, but that's how it was. And so assistant coaches in women's basketball, they like to move up. They don't want to stay in the same place. As Coach Fisher said, in this business, people want to move and they want to go to bigger programs and get more money. And that's what happened. She did lose 2 assistants in 1 year. One fellow had some medical problems that she's going to keep confidential, not get into. And the other fellow came in to replace him, had been in the NBA, and he didn't know what to do to perform the scouts that he had to perform. He had another guy do it, caused that guy to double up on his work. That guy got tired of it and exposed this fella. He leaves in the middle of practice one day because he was being exposed and he couldn't do the job. So the average tenure for her assistant coaches, they didn't look into it. They didn't really inquire as to why there was a turnover. Now, was she perfect in dealing with all of her assistants? No. There's one assistant, Heidi Vanderveer, who is very critical of Coach Burns. Very critical of her. For a reason Coach Burns is a little mystified, but in any event, she accepts that criticism and moves on. So, players want to transfer out of the program, according to what Mr. Sturck wrote about the seniors. The captain of the team is going to say no, that that's only half the story. There were players who wanted more playing time. Coach Burns exercised the judgment that they were not going to get it because they weren't performing. They were disgruntled, and they wanted to go not because of Coach Burns, but because they weren't getting the playing time. And then criticism of yelling. Coach Burns yells when she's on the court. Coach Burns yells when she's in practice. Coach Burns is a strong personality, and she admits to yelling. And I don't know of any coach that who's successful. But in any event, that was a criticism. Now, where are we going with this? This Executive Order 1058, Exhibit 325, page 2. San Diego State has something called executive orders. They come out from the Office of the President, and they provide information, directives to the campuses on what to do. The Executive Order 1058 deals with protected disclosures under the California Whistleblower Protection Act. Right up top to the title. All right. California Whistleblower Protection Act. And this goes into what the order is, and we go down to definition of terms. And there are 3 terms here. Improper governmental activity, protected disclosure, and retaliation. Now, I want to be sure that Ms. Goddard told me during the break that I may have garbled something here, and I want to be sure I get this straightened out. A protected disclosure is defined here as a good faith communication, so forth and so on, that may evidence an improper governmental activity. Now, we're not saying that San Diego State violated Title IX. What we're saying is that Coach Burns made protected disclosures under the law of improper governmental activity, and those protected disclosures of improper governmental activity put her in this category of being protected. You can't retaliate against someone who has made a protected disclosure, is the essence of what that said. And that's what happened. Now, in this case, ladies and gentlemen, there's some evidence that we'd like to show you, but we can't. And the reason we can't is because Mr. Sturck and what he did, he told us that he kept a file on Coach Burns. He had regular meetings with Sally Rouse. He had meetings with Wicker. He had meetings with other folks. He kept notes of these meetings involving discussions about Coach Burns. And the reason we can't show this to you is Mr. Sturck destroyed his file. He says after Sally Rouse retired in June of 2013, he threw it in the garbage, all of those notes. Now, at that point in time, Mr. Sturck had been to the meeting where Coach Burns was fired in April of 2013. At that time, they discussed Coach Burns getting a lawyer. So he knew, he had knowledge that a lawyer might be involved. Yet, he destroyed his file and deprived us of the opportunity to see the contents. The next thing I want to talk about is what San Diego State did once Coach Burns filed her whistleblower claim. We filed a lawsuit. We had to wait a while before and we waited a while while Coach Burns was looking for a job trying to get a job, to file the whistleblower complaint. We filed the whistleblower complaint. They wait a year and assign it to a woman named Heather Bendinelli. Heather Bendinelli is an employee of San Diego State. She's a trained lawyer, and she conducted an investigation. But unfortunately, she didn't have much experience in conducting investigations of this nature, and she didn't follow the procedures and protocols of San Diego State in many respects. And her investigation was incomplete. Mr. Sturck didn't tell her about the documents that he had destroyed. She wasn't given Mr. Sturck's email from May of 2012, the driving me crazy email. But nonetheless, after concluding her investigation, she determined that Coach Burns had not made any protected disclosures. Now, in the course of her investigation, Ms. Bendinelli discovered some things. We've taken her deposition, and she's told us some very important things. She said that as investigator, she thought that some of the complaints of Coach Burns can be characterized as Title IX issues, meaning laundry list issues. She admitted that Mr. Wicker, in his interview with her, said that Coach Burns complained a lot. Ms. Bendinelli said that Coach Burns' performance evaluations didn't support Mr. Sturck's comments about how she treated people. And more importantly, she saw the video that I showed you of the interaction with Mr. Barrett on the bench, and she said there was no workplace violence, and here's how she characterized it. She said the video showed physical contact that seems in keeping with the basketball game and the adrenaline and emotion that's involved in coaching. Now, San Diego State will come in here, and they're going to have some things to say about this, of course, and I fully expect them to take on Coach Burns pretty vigorously. They will hit her hard. But before we came to trial, we had to look into some things and to decide if, as they were claimed, they were true, then we wouldn't be coming here. So one of the things we looked into was this workplace violence claim, and you've seen the evidence. I've given you Ms. Bendinelli's characterization of it, and even Mr. Barrett, the fellow who was the supposed victim of this. Barrett's a 6'2" guy, burly guy, so he said that Coach Burns didn't have any intent to injure him. Many people at San Diego State we've talked to said she was never malicious at all. Now, they did this investigation, the first one by Wicker behind her backs. They never told her about it. And here's what they say. They say, well, we didn't do that because we were concerned that she would retaliate. Jim Sturck is a former college football player. Wicker's a pretty tall guy, a little slim. Barrett's big. Bynum is a young guy, healthy and hardy. So the thought that she would retaliate against these people was ridiculous. There were some women interviewed, and all of these people we deposed said she never ever threatened them, that they never felt that she was malicious in anything she did. So that was their justification for not telling Coach Burns. They're going to claim that she didn't make protected disclosures of things that involve the laundry list, but you saw Mr. Sturt's driving me crazy email with her complaints. And Mr. Wicker recorded in his report to Mr. Sturt criticizing Coach Burns because when she was talking to him about equipment that she wasn't getting, she said, "Boys rule, girls drool," meaning that they were drooling at what they would like to have, but they weren't having it, and he was critical of it. Now, they're also saying that she didn't raise the Title IX issues clearly enough for them to realize they were laundry list issues. We have an expert, Title IX expert, named Nancy Hogshead McCarr, a very impressive person. She's got 3 Olympic gold medals from the LA Olympics as a swimmer, and has been working in Title IX all her life. She will say that any reasonable athletic director would know that a complaint that female athletes were not getting an item on the laundry list that I showed you would indicate a lack of equal opportunity and a potential violation of the law of protected disclosure. Now, I told you I'm going to talk about her performance evaluations. Let's go to slide 16. In her first year back at San Diego State was 05, and then this is a performance evaluation for 06, 07. There's a category on the performance evaluation for what's called management and administration. And, it has a category called appropriate interaction with support staff. Now they've got the scale up here: excellent, good, satisfactory, and poor. So she was given a 3, appropriate interactions with support staff, and she's told that she is leading her staff and student athletes in a positive direction, encouraged to maximize her allies in the department, work together toward your team's success. Now, that's what she was told. We go forward to the 2010 year. That's the year of the incident involving Mr. Larson, and she got graded down on that appropriate interaction and support staff, and she got a tooth. It's not good. She got a tooth. But she came back, and for the year after she was graded down, after that year, for year 10 to 11, slide 51, she bounced back. The evidence of that is right here. For management and administration, appropriate interaction with support staff, she was given a 4, where she had previous year been told she needed improvement. She came back. Not only was she satisfactory, but she was good. 1 tick off the top. Same thing happened in 2011, 2012. Let's go to slide 52. Here she's told she is a overall great representation of San Diego State and its program. And finally, for 11 and 12, slide 60. Again, what's there? Appropriate interaction with staff. 4, good. So she gets that reviewed. She renews her contract, and she goes forward into a championship season. Now, let's turn to the last item that I want to discuss with you, and that's damages. What we're talking about here is the harms and losses to Coach Burns. How has she been harmed? What has she lost? First thing she's lost is her career. Her good name has been destroyed. Her career has been destroyed because of her high profile. The news of her termination spread like fire coast to coast. Even to this day, when she's out on the road and she's recruiting and talking to people, she goes to these events where there are bunches and bunches of people, hundreds if not thousands of people, where she's watching recruits. It's a big thing. And people come up to her and talk to her about her termination. And athletic directors won't touch her for a head coach job. Fortunately, she landed a job at USC as an assistant coach. She's the associate head coach, the #1 assistant at SC, and she's eternally grateful to them and to Pat Hayden, the former athletic director, for hiring her. But she's trying to get head coach jobs. And quite frankly, women who've been fired, women head coaches who've been fired, don't get head coach jobs again. So, the damages categories are breach of contract, whistleblower retaliation, whether or not San Diego State needs to be punished. Now, the damages categories for breach of contract are into these categories. One is the wages and benefits that she should have received had she not been terminated for cause. Had they terminated her, what would she have gotten under the contract? We're claiming they didn't have good cause, as is defined in the contract. If you agree with that, then she's entitled to get the money that was due under her contract. She's lost pension benefits. She's lost other benefits that she would have received had she worked through the end of that contract. We have an expert named Robert Taylor, who is a certified public accountant and has a master's in finance from San Diego State, as a matter of fact. And he's calculated that number at $1,575,527. That's what they owe her under the contract. Now, the losses don't stop there. Coach Burns had gone in and talked to Mr. Stirk, told him she wanted to retire San Diego State. She was talking about at least 10 more years. Her hero, quite frankly, in the men's world is Coach Steve Fisher. She and Coach Fisher and Coach Fisher's wife were very close. And Coach Fisher's in his 70s. She had the feeling that she wanted to be able to go on and work for a long time. Our expert has calculated what her damages would be over her work life expectancy. In other words, until when she could be expected to retire, whether she did or not, but that's where we cut it off. And that was at 66.76 years. That doesn't make sense, does it? Age 66.76. She was 54 at the time, so that would stretch it out for another 12 3/4 years. And he's calculated those damages at $3,151,054. $3,151,054. Now, in addition to this, under the law, Coach Burns is entitled to seek damages for the non-economic things, such as mental suffering, anxiety, humiliation, a big thing, loss of enjoyment of life, and emotional distress. These are called non-economic damages. So she's lost her career in sports. Her national reputation has been tarnished. She's embarrassed. She's endured a lot of public humiliation because it has been reported nationally that she was violent and she engaged in workplace violence. And she didn't. She doesn't know if she'll ever find a job. She's doubtful that she'll ever land a job as a head coach. So her reputation is gone. And now she has to deal with something that causes her a lot of anxiety, and that is a shorter contract. She worked under 5-year contracts. Now she has either a 1-year contract, or fortunately she got a 2-year contract that is up, I think, this year. So she's been torn apart by this, and there's no fixed standard for calculating emotional stress damages. When we get to the end of the case, you've heard the evidence, I did closing argument, I will give you some thoughts for you to consider. And if you find that she's entitled to an award, for you to make. And finally, if you think that San Diego State's conduct, a marriage punishment, you'll be given an option to deal with that later on. So in conclusion, it's a word I know that you're happy to hear. In conclusion, let me say that Coach Burns' intentions were to give the women at San Diego State in the women's basketball program an equal opportunity to become all they could be. She was a true red and black person. She said complimentary things about San Diego State. She said complimentary things about Jim Sturt and John David Waker when she was totally unaware that they were saying bad things about her behind her back. But she was an Aztec. She wanted to retire San Diego State. She can't do it. So at the end of this case, we're going to ask you for a verdict to compensate Coach Burns for her harms and her losses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapin. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the plaintiff's opening statement. You ready to start?
Just going to need a couple minutes to
Sure.
switch gears on getting the Illinois.
It's no problem.
Okay.